Hi, I'm Pam Norley and I head Fidelity Charitable, and I'm so grateful to all of you who are joining us for our third COVID-19 webinar. As we all continue to work from home, social distance, and stay up to date on how this virus affects us in our communities, the country, and the world, all of us at Team Fidelity Charitable are working to help you understand how you can support a response using your giving account and in other ways. As the pandemic continues, we've seen an outpouring of generosity and support to those most impacted by the virus, the medical community, the frontline workers, the vulnerable, and of course, nonprofits. And as we have responded to your requests for how to think about your charitable giving in this environment, we've organized our recommendations into 3 pillars. The first is, of course, supporting medical needs, from providing crucial protective equipment for frontline workers to development of preventative and treatment research for the virus. 2, protecting vulnerable populations, those among us who, for example, are food insecure, homeless, or underemployed, suffering from domestic abuse, mental illness, or other conditions. And then 3, sustaining nonprofits. NPOs are facing increased demand for service, but severe strains on fundraising and ability to use volunteers to serve their missions. These topics and the giving around them are critical to support an immediate COVID relief, and we are very excited to have structured this framework and encourage all of you to go to our website at fidelitycharitable.org to find replays of the 2 prior webinars that we hosted. But we're here today to talk about sustaining nonprofits. Those that we care so much about are really in crisis in unimaginable ways. Whether these organizations bring us together through art or theater or dance, or provide healing, research, and support to medical patients, education, delivering necessary essentials to those who would otherwise go without it, and so much more. These organizations are just managing in unprecedented times, unprecedented challenges and hardships. And it's ultimately impacting all of our communities around the world. And as the need continues to grow, nonprofits are stepping up and working even harder. And they're doing so in spite of the challenges I mentioned with decreased funding, modified work environments, and reduced staffing. And as I prepared for this conversation and webinar today, I reflected on my own personal experience supporting a nonprofit that's very near and dear to me. I've been a donor, a fundraiser, and a participant in the largest athletic fundraising event in the US that raises money for cancer research at Dana-Farber Institute in Boston. And it's done through an annual bike-a-thon of thousands of people coming to ride across Massachusetts in support of the cause. Like many people, cancer has impacted my life, family members, father, grandfather, uncles, husband, many, many friends. 650,000 people die from cancer alone. And of course, in this environment, it's really, really challenging to have been diagnosed or being treated. And so this PanMass Challenge organization just reached out to us. And of course, they're very concerned. The event usually happens the first weekend of August. And they basically have now reached out and said it's going to be, kind of reimagined, but at the same time to really keep up your fundraising and to stay your course. And this was going to be my 5th year riding. Of course, I'm going to continue to still train, but it's a very difficult challenge to try to raise money in this environment. So the question for all of us is, how do we help sustain those organizations that are so critical to our society? Nonprofits work to support communities around the world, but they also play a really important role in our economy. Nonprofits are the 3rd largest employer here in the US. And now due to that, COVID, conversations have become very focused on even sustaining these organizations. Declining revenue streams, fundraising curtailed. There's just a real significant challenge around having people volunteer or give their time, and all of this, in an environment where we're just not kind of sure what tomorrow brings. So with an eye on immediate relief efforts, the Fidelity Charitable Donor Community is really in a unique position to continue or even accelerate your giving to these charities. Joining us here today, we have 3 top American nonprofits to discuss the challenges that are facing nonprofits. And before I introduce them to you, I do want to remind you that we issued this challenge to raise $200 million for COVID relief, and we issued it on April 16th. And the goal was to try to raise it by tomorrow, Tuesday, May 5th, and we'll talk more about that. You know, we chose that date to coincide with the Global Day of Giving called Giving Tuesday Now, and our collaborator Giving Tuesday launched this in response to the pandemic. I'm so pleased to share with you that as of this past Friday, we actually surpassed the $200 million of grants that have gone out from Fidelity Charitable. We're already at $215 million. But I also want to share with you that since the beginning of the year, Fidelity Charitable donors have recommended $2.3 billion to over 100,000 nonprofits across the world. So thank you so much for your generosity. So we've collaborated for today's webinar with Giving Tuesday, Points of Light, and Candid to design a conversation specifically to educate you about the new needs and pressures nonprofits are experiencing in this crisis, and to hopefully inspire you to take even more action and help give with your dollars or with your time or talents. Today's conversation or webinar is going to be broken into 3 parts. I want to start by having our guests share their unique perspectives on the nonprofit community and the challenges that they're seeing in the day-to-day work that they do. 2, we also want to have them highlight specific examples of innovative things that are being done that hopefully inspire you to action. And then 3, we want to provide guidance to all of you around how to think about your giving at this unprecedented time. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. As I mentioned, we've invited 3 leaders to join us because of their unique perspectives and expertise supporting and advocating for nonprofits around the world. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Jacob Harold. Jacob joins us from Candid, the original organization of NPO Consumer Reports, GuideStar. Candid is a great resource for donors seeking to learn more about charities that you would like to support. We also have with us Natalye Paquin from Points of Light, an organization that is solely dedicated to creating a global world of volunteering. She's going to talk about the importance of volunteering in this environment. And then finally, Asha Curran joins us from Giving Tuesday, the global generosity movement, to talk about the dire needs of nonprofits that are facing right now and the importance of supporting them now. It's as important ever that Giving Tuesday decided to add an additional day of giving this year. If you haven't had a chance to review yet, we have provided the biographies of all of our panelists. They're down there under the handout section, and we hope that you'll take just some time to learn more about these organizations. So I'd like to kick off the conversation by having each of our panelists share with us the work of their organizations and what life has been like since the pandemic. And Jacob, I'm going to start with you, and if you could share with us also the vision and mission of Candid and the work that you're doing on the ground today.
Of course, Pam, so glad to be here, and amazing to see almost 1,000 folks joining this conversation today. So Candid was formed last year by the combination of GuideStar, which housed the largest database of information about nonprofit organizations in the US, and Foundation Center, which housed the largest database of information about foundation grants in the US. And the idea, the premise of forming Candid was that there are really 2 prerequisites to effective philanthropy. And the first one is generosity, the best parts of the human spirit that we see when people stand up and reach out a hand to help. And then the second is information, and that in a complex world, we need good information to make good decisions about how to make that world better, whether as a donor, as a nonprofit executive, as a journalist, as a corporate leader or a government official. So I wanted to start out by just sharing a little bit of information on what we've seen so far in the social sector's response to the pandemic. And I've got good news and bad news. So the good news first is that we've seen extraordinary generosity coming from the American people and people all around the world. I put this slide together on Friday and it was 9.1 billion. I just checked again this morning, we're up to $9.5 billion in COVID-related donations that we've been able to track around the world. Now, I should note that that number is actually a vast underestimate because this is mostly corporate and foundation giving that is possible to track. A lot of individual giving is not possible to track. So the actual generosity coming from humanity right now is truly quite extraordinary. And when we look at past disasters, Katrina, Sandy, 9/11, you could add them all up and it's less than this. So this is an unprecedented outpouring of generosity. So that's the good news. Next slide, please. The bad news is that the nonprofit sector is relatively fragile. The business models of nonprofit organizations assume an ability to raise money, to actually hold that race that Pam was talking about, to hold that fundraiser. And right now that is very, very difficult for some nonprofits. And we have here some basic stats that show that about 80% of nonprofits have less than 3 months financial cushion in the bank. Now that doesn't mean they're going to go out of business in less than 3 months. There are lots of things that organizations can do to cut expenses, to try and keep revenue from going all the way down to zero. And this reflects an incredible amount of diversity across the field, different sorts of business models. But this should be a reminder that the nonprofit sector relies on steady funding, and it's seeing need go up right now, even as many sources of revenue are drying up. So we have to keep in mind that if we're not thoughtful, we could see tens or even hundreds of thousands of organizations go out of business, depending on how long this crisis lasts and how people respond. So there's good news and there's bad news, and we're all facing an uncertain future, but our hope is that with access to the right information, we can make good decisions about how to face that future.
Good. So thank you so much, Jacob. Natalye, let me just then turn it to you. So first share with us the vision and mission of Points of Light, and then what are you seeing in volunteering trends since the pandemic, and how is Points of Light thinking about supporting volunteerism during this time?
Sure, and thank you for inviting Points of Light to join this really important conversation. At Points of Light, we believe that the most powerful individual person is the individual who takes action to make a difference in their community. Our mission is to inspire, equip, and mobilize individuals to take action to make a positive difference. We actually are a global nonprofit. We are in over 200 cities and 37 countries. Each year through our network, we organize over 5 million volunteers, and we work with nonprofits, corporations, and individuals. And from a vision perspective, we envision a world where it's easy for people to get engaged, easy for people to be involved in their community, and there's no one who's sitting on the sidelines of change. Next slide, please. So what we're seeing, next slide. What we're seeing around civic engagement is that it includes volunteerism, but it also includes a host of other tools for people to use in terms of how they move an issue forward. We can use our voice through social media or through our regular networks. We can vote. We choose where we want to work. We donate. There are just so many different ways, and of course there's social entrepreneurs and volunteers. There's so many ways for people to get engaged, and we see this civic life as the connective tissue of community, with volunteerism being the backbone. A couple of statistics I'd love to share with the audience today in terms of what we're seeing post-COVID, and we know that 3 out of 4 nonprofits rely heavily on volunteers to actually do their business and accomplish their mission. In our network in particular, 92% of our nonprofits have said that they have experienced disruption in services due to a lack of volunteers being available because of social distancing, and 75% have seen an increase in demand. And so the result is that nonprofits are taking a little harder hit in terms of not being able to rely on volunteers in the way that they normally do for their business, and the demands of society and the issues that they are organized to achieve remain. And so those are our initial observations.
Good, and I'll come back to you to talk about some of the innovative ways that Points of Light is helping people think about volunteerism. So Asha, let me
Absolutely.
now turn it to you. So Giving Tuesday started back in 2012, just this global generosity movement following what Black Friday and now Cyber Monday as a way to think about giving back during the holiday season. Talk a little bit more about giving, maybe some of the history on Giving Tuesday, but then also talk about Giving Tuesday now, which is tomorrow. Mute.
Sorry, you would think I would have learned to unmute myself by now. Thank you so much for having me. And Giving Tuesday Now is indeed tomorrow. We planned it with only 5 weeks notice, but the reaction has really been extraordinary. So Giving Tuesday, as you say, was started in 2012 as a day to give back following Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Sort of rooted in the idea that everyone has something to give and every act of generosity counts. And now, 8 years later, it is present in 70 official countries, hundreds of local communities, with activity on every country and territory in the world. On the last Giving Tuesday, which was 2019, over $2 billion was donated, median gift size of just over $100. That's just in the United States alone. And after, a season where people were already giving to, numerous other things that happened, and above and beyond the money, millions of people volunteered and performed just immeasurable acts of kindness. So Giving Tuesday Now, which is tomorrow, is an additional day of unity and giving in response to the unprecedented need caused by this pandemic. Giving Tuesday in December will still happen, but Giving Tuesday has always been about bringing people together and inspiring people to give in new ways, and we need that now. So we watched this pandemic unfold and cause suffering and chaos and uncertainty, but at the same time we were seeing really inspiring, spontaneous acts of giving coming from all corners, and a yearning to give. Sometimes a desire to give and not quite knowing how. And we recognized that people were feeling isolated and powerless and hopeless, and in search of something they could do, they could do to help. So we decided to move forward with Giving Tuesday Now to hopefully drive a massive collective spike of generosity, citizen engagement, and business and philanthropic activation, and support for communities and nonprofits around the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're so excited to be a part of it. So let me go on to the second question, maybe come back and just be talking about some of the creative, innovative ways that nonprofits are operating in this environment. Again, starting back with you, Jacob, and through the data that Candid collects, how are nonprofits responding to the newfound challenges as a result? What are the biggest concerns? What should people be thinking about in the days and months ahead around how to evaluate the organizations that they want to support?
Yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of innovation, but we're still so much in the middle of this crisis that it's hard to get structured data on that at this point. But I will give a few examples. On the fundraising side, we're seeing immense creativity. A jazz nonprofit based in New York that's holding online happy hours as fundraisers. A nonprofit that supports Haiti that normally has a walk to raise money. And instead they said, well, you're stuck in your house or your apartment. Why don't you do 200 stairs or 200 flights of stairs instead? And so, that sort of creativity, we're seeing on the fundraising side. It's addressing some of the revenue disruptions that nonprofits are seeing. What's ultimately more important, though, is the creativity on the programmatic side, on the good that organizations are trying to do in the context of this crisis. And an example I'll give is the food bank in Orange County, California. And food banks tend to rely very heavily on volunteers, and often those volunteers are in cramped spaces, packing up boxes to give to folks, and they had to shut that operation down, and that forced them to completely transform their business model, and they quickly did. They created a pop-up drive-through, serving thousands and thousands of people. They completely restructured their inventory so that the food was more shelf stable for folks who were only able to get to food every once in a while. Then they hired a bunch of part-time workers, including from folks who had lost their jobs, to help bridge the gap. And then they figured out how to bring some of those volunteers back in a way that was safe for them. So, we're seeing that kind of programmatic innovation throughout the nonprofit sector. And to me, a key lesson for donors in all of this is the need to allow nonprofits as much flexibility as possible. That when you give an organization unrestricted dollars, they're able to pivot in a moment like this, change how they do their work, restructure things in a way to maximize progress against their mission. And when donors really restrict the degrees of freedom that a nonprofit has, it can make it harder to adapt in a time like this.
Yeah, good. That's so inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Natalye, we've talked again and again about the hit that nonprofits are taking as a result of all the physical restrictions and social distancing. How should they be thinking about volunteers? And if you're a nonprofit thinking about volunteers, or more importantly, if you're an individual thinking about volunteering?
Thank you. Well, first of all, we wanted to share that this crisis or pandemic has really created an opportunity, as Jacob said, for people to be innovative, and we are seeing an acceleration of innovation. In our network, 83% of the affiliates that we work with really quickly pivoted in terms of how they do their business, and their input allowed us, Points of Light, to create toolkits and DIY projects for virtual volunteering, skill-based volunteering, and that's up on our website. A couple of examples that I would share with you. One has to do with Points of Light, and then others around the globe actually, is this year is our 30th anniversary. And we were planning a huge conference in Washington, D.C. with all of the bells and whistles. And the conference was for June. Lots of nonprofits actually have events where they raise dollars through those events. And you really had three options. You could postpone the event, you could cancel the event, or you could figure out how to actually deliver that event in a different way. We are delivering our event virtually and creating an online experience. And I will share with you, Pam, and to all of the people who are gathered today, we normally attract about 1,500 participants. When we made the announcement that we would do a digital or a virtual event, we had 950 registrants. In 2 weeks, we now have over 2,500 registrants. And so it just goes to show you that if you change how you will deliver and be a little innovative in your delivery, you actually can reach more people and maybe have a more successful event. Two other examples I will share on the ground. One comes from our affiliate in Hong Kong. And just like in the United States, we're dealing with the digital divide and students not having the equipment that they need to do distant or online learning. And what they did is they engaged a number of volunteers to help refurbish old computers and then gathered and collected those computers for the students who needed it. They also engaged volunteers to help with some tutorial services for hearing impaired students. And so, looking specifically for volunteers who were fluent in sign language. And then locally here, in the United States, I live in Atlanta, and I'm really close to the museum, and we're seeing volunteers who are taking their skills. So we have the Alliance Theater here and the costume workers. They're actually taking those skills and redirecting those skills to making face masks and other materials that are needed for first responders. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing people prepare kits and then have those school kits distributed with the lunches that are being distributed at the schools through feeding organizations. And people are just being very innovative.
That's great. That's great to hear. And I think, it's going to continue. I think that's, as more and more people are getting more comfortable kind of going back out as some of the states really, release restrictions, I think you'll see more opportunities. So thanks for the information to go to your website to try to learn more about how to volunteer in your community. So Asha, I just have to say, as you think about getting support for Giving Tuesday now, like how does that happen, right? I mean, do you just decide, okay, we're going to do another Giving Tuesday following this pandemic? I mean, what's the community of people that you reach out to try to make that decision to kind of officially announce it?
Well, Giving Tuesday has basically been one big collaborative effort. We ourselves are a 501c3, but a fairly small one and a fairly new one. But as a global movement, it is just countless numbers of organizations and collectives and houses of worship and families and communities. And so they were already part of the movement, right? And so when you have an extended network like that, it's so much easier to mobilize. We didn't have to build from the ground up, right? We'd already spent 8 years really, building and supporting and amplifying all of the work that this global community is doing. And so we turned to them and said, do you like this idea, right? We didn't want to impose it on anyone, but the reaction was really overwhelmingly positive. So it's really these hundreds and thousands of leaders on the ground in 70 countries and beyond. And as Jacob and Natalye said, just the leaders and staff of nonprofits are showing incredible creativity and innovation, and really high levels of collaboration. They're really working together, which I think should be very inspiring to donors as well, because when organizations work together, if you give funds to one of those organizations, you're really uplifting that whole cause area and not just that one organization.
Do you have any examples of any innovation you've seen out in the field or things that nonprofits are doing to serve and further their missions?
Yeah, so one thing I love to see is when organizations practice what we call mission over brand, which means to come together around an issue or a cause and really like link arms and break down silos. And we've been encouraging that all 8 years of Giving Tuesday, but I've never seen this much of it happening. So one example is this great campaign called Next Gen Generosity, which is all about showcasing the generosity of young people right now and all of the kind of ways that young people are making a difference. And it's like a dozen different organizations, but they're not putting organization first. They're putting the broader campaign, the awareness raising, the storytelling, that's coming first, and then they're sort of leading from the back. Our data shows that they'll still benefit. They'll still be able to fundraise successfully, but what they're doing will speak to people in a deeper way.
That's very impressive. Thank you so much for sharing all that. So now we're going to turn to questions and answers and questions that have come in from our audience in advance of this. We offered everybody an opportunity to submit questions, and we've received hundreds of them. So what I've done is the team's gone through, and we've selected various questions for some of you, and we'll start with those, and to the extent other questions come in that we can ask over the next 15 minutes, we'll do that as well. So let me start with all of you and put this question out there. With disasters of any magnitude, we generally see initial funding to support them, but there's no tail. We see like huge dip after just even a week sometimes with giving to national disasters around the country. In fact, just for some context, Fidelity Charitable donors gave away $60 million in 2017 when we had 7 disasters, and we had given over $60 million to support pandemic just in the month of March. So we're excited about the initial funding, but of course now we start to get a little anxious about whether or not the funding will sustain as maybe less critical work becomes more apparent. So maybe starting with you, Jacob, what are your thoughts on how this pandemic and the response from philanthropy might be different from others?
Yeah, and it's further complicated by just the uncertainty that we face as a society and an economy right now. I don't know if my kids are going to be back at school in the fall. And so that can make it hard to plan. But I have 2 thoughts when it comes to philanthropy. The first is that we often use the phrase, we're saving for a rainy day. Whether in our organization, at a foundation, in a donor advised fund, in our own savings account. And this is more than a rainy day, it's a cyclone. And so now is the time, if there ever was one, to step up and move, kind of break beyond our old patterns of giving, which may mean giving now and later instead of just one of the two. And then, related to that is the question of time horizons. There are those who argue it's most important to address immediate needs. Others prefer to focus on long-term solutions. And I think now is a time to remember that all of those time horizons are moral. And working in the short term, the medium term, and the long term is all necessary right now. To do that, that may require that folks are ready to dip into whatever reserves they may have, whether of money or of energy. But it sure feels like now is a time to do that, because if we don't, I think we very much run into the danger of what you're describing of things really falling off after a few months.
Yeah, good. Natalye, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I'll build on what Jacob is saying, and I do think that there are some lessons that we could learn from the 5 phases of emergency management. And we would remember that emergency management, there's prevention, preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. And so while we are in the response stage right now, particularly all of the humanitarian efforts, there is recovery behind that. But what's most important with emergency management is around prevention and preparedness. And so it's really important to continue to support the nonprofits that are doing good work in the community, because hopefully they will be more prepared, or help the community be more prepared, or even prevent some of the atrocities that we are seeing today. And so with the next, let's just say, healthcare crisis, we would hope to have to treat less people because we have a more healthy society.
Good. Asha, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the current situation is unique, right? So we can't necessarily expect to see the same patterns as in previous shocks to the economy, but research has shown that in the last recession, DAFs provided notable resilience to the nonprofit sector, and I think that's the opportunity. Here we've seen that DAFs can be a significant way to mitigate some of the impact of this kind of crisis on nonprofits. So the need is greater now, but so is the opportunity.
Good. So next question, this is for Jacob and Natalye. Should I temporarily change charities that I support to address COVID-19, or stay the course with my existing charities? I think this is important because, although I see the devastation and the ability for some nonprofits to support COVID relief now, I also have been traditionally funding other nonprofits that are important to my values. Jacob?
Sure. And the thing is, this is both a values-based question and a strategic one. And ultimately, we have to rely on people to choose their issue with the heart and then their organization with their head. So it's a combination of the emotional and the analytical. What I would say is that it's important to continue supporting organizations you've already supported. But if you know that the organization you're supported is so well endowed or has such a strong financial model that it's going to be able to weather this, then I certainly wouldn't blame you for shifting to an organization that might be more fragile. And that's something you can ask the organization about. If you have a donor advised fund through Fidelity, you can use the research tool to access Candid's information about nonprofit finances to get a sense of that. But people are going to have to make their own choices there. But I hope that people don't completely drop the ones they've been supporting. But I also hope this is an opportunity to rethink what's really most important to you. What are the needs that are most profound around us on the short, medium, and long term? And maybe make some adjustments and hopefully some increases.
Good. Natalye, thoughts on that?
Sure. I'll add to that to say and ask the question: does it have to be an either or? Is there a way for you to support both? And I would also suggest that if you believe in the mission of the organization that you've been supporting, to absolutely continue to support them. And if it's possible for you to double down on your support so that they are healthy and available and ready to actually continue their mission post crisis. In terms of how to give, I think my recommendation would be general operating unrestricted dollars, because if you believe, again, in the mission, and if you have confidence in the leadership, you must know that the leaders will direct those funds to the most pressing needs to have the greatest impact, particularly during this situation.
Thank you. So Asha, Giving Tuesday obviously is not just about making a financial donation. It's important to have just a national day of giving or a global day of giving. What do we get as a society when we're approaching it from a giving mindset?
Yeah, I love the phrase giving mindset. You know, the world is in crisis. We're all experiencing this pandemic together, and we all need to be focusing on the solutions together. Generosity is a powerful countervailing force, not only to nonprofits in dire need, but also to isolation and loneliness, which are already prevalent in our society and bound to worsen now. Our ability to give and to help gives us agency, reminds us we can make a meaningful impact if we're intentional about it. So this global day is really just as much about unity as it is about giving, and we see those really as going hand in hand. You know, a just and generous society is about reaching out to others and being stronger as a community. So a giving mindset will allow us to come together as we think about how to, you know, come out of this crisis and heal in a way that makes us stronger. So, you know, giving certainly can be financial and has to be, right? These organizations really desperately need resource, and I think there's such creativity possible in the way that people leverage their DAF accounts. You know, you might think about donating $100,000 to an organization, but you might also think about making that a match. Or you might think about making it a match to leverage other actions. So one organization last Giving Tuesday, you know, had a $10,000 donation from a board member, and every act of kindness or connection that somebody shared with the organization on their website unlocked another $100 of that match. So such really amazing ways to do even just the financial part. And then beyond that, you know, as Natalye was, you know, said, multiple other opportunities. And as I've been reminding people too, you know, the things that people are doing, not that there's like skills-based things like sewing masks, right, or doing online therapy sessions, but there's also things that people are doing that are just bringing people together, right? Singing circles and dancing circles and all of these kinds of ways that we're using digital technologies to build community. Like every person who starts something like that is volunteering, right? They're bringing comfort and joy, and that's a really important way of being generous right now.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Jacob, back to you. We know that 31% of all giving happens in the month of December. It certainly does at Fidelity Charitable. Are there any predictions for third quarter fundraising or giving at this point that you've thought through?
I mean, my only prediction is that it's going to be different.
Yeah.
And, you know, be different for a number of reasons that might act against each other. On the one hand, people have been very generous in the early part of the year. Will that have a consequence in the latter part of the year? I hope not. You know, what stage will we be in our response to the crisis as a society? What will the needs look like? And then also, you know, will there be any further changes to the tax code that might have implications as well? So I would really hesitate to make any predictions, and instead say, you know, we have to embrace this uncertainty and figure out how we act right now.
Yes, I'm optimistic. You know, at Fidelity Charitable, we see grant making throughout the year, even though 31% kind of comes in at the end of the year, mostly because it's calendar driven. You know, we're optimistic that this is going to continue through the year, and we'll even have more dollars going out in 2020 than in 2019. Natalye, so let me get back to you. What's the best way to approach a nonprofit about volunteering, particularly now that they're so overwhelmed? You know, we got a lot of registrants who asked about how they can donate their time right now, but they're concerned that nobody's there to engage with them in terms of how to do that.
The best way is to reach out online, to email, to reach out online or to reach out through social media. We know that they may not be in their physical space or place, but everyone is connecting virtually through emails and other digital solutions. And so we would say that would be the best way to reach out.
Great. And Asha, we just got a question for you. Is it too late to make a donation today? Will it count towards tomorrow's Giving Tuesday event?
And any day you make a donation is great, but tomorrow is the big day, and I would also encourage you to share when you do. Some people feel like it's more noble in a way to make a gift and be quiet about it, but the truth is that your friends and your network is more likely to give based on the fact that you did. So think of it as a good thing to do, to brag about your giving, because you are encouraging more support for the thing that you care about.
Good. Okay, this is a question for Jacob and Natalye. Starting with you, Jacob. What is the best way to identify and contribute to local needs, whether it's by volunteering, giving, or engaging others in a good cause?
Wow, again, I would say that my shorthand is to pick your issue with your heart and your organization with your head.
Yep.
So to really trust your own gut when it comes to which aspect of society you want to try to serve. And to really embrace that emotional aspect, but then to take a pause and to try and be analytical about how you can be most helpful and what organizations are most effective. Anyone can use guidestar.org, and again, those resources are available for those who have donor advised funds with Fidelity through the primary interface. And just to do a search by town and by issue, maybe by organizational size, to get a sense of what is available in your community. But in a time like this, it can be hard to be as analytical as we might want to be because of that sense of immediacy, and we just have to move forward regardless.
Good.
Sure.
Natalye?
Pam, I would offer, I would again build on what Jacob is saying, and to say data plus stories equals proof. And so absolutely do the research and learn about the data, but also speak with people about the stories so that that data is applied and it is within the context of something that is meaningful for you. I'll use as an example, we know that in the United States, 63 million Americans say that they volunteer every year. And that volunteer economy creates over $200 billion, and it's almost like an invisible economy that is moving our society forward. But those numbers alone, they don't tell the story about what happens when someone doesn't man a hotline, a crisis hotline. They don't tell the story about pets being adopted. They don't tell the story about tutoring and the impact of a reading circle helping students after school. And so, we think that the best way to discern the need is absolutely to do the research and get the data, because that's very important, but it's also important to understand the stories and the true impact of generosity.
Well, thank you so much. We are at time now, and I just want to make a few closing comments. Just Jacob, Asha, Natalye, thank you so much for your time, your thoughts, your insight, your data, your storytelling. We very much appreciate it. But there's 5 things that we want our donors to be thinking about as they support nonprofits during this pandemic. The one is consider, continue to support the organizations that you care about. But I think, as Jacob said, use your heart and your head to make decisions about where you want to provide support. Philanthropy is obviously so much needed at this time, and we're so appreciative for all of the work that our donors have been doing to make sure that money is flowing to nonprofits from their DAPs. Second, I think, as Natalye pointed out, give with unrestricted support, allow organizations to be able to use the funds as they see fit. I know that we've had a number of people changing the ways that they're sending their donations out to make it clear that although they were going to initially support a particular program or something, they wanted to be used by the leadership in a way that would best support COVID relief. Third, consider altering your giving timeline, maybe some now and some later. But I think be thinking about this is the time when the rainy day fund could most be put to use. Fourth, volunteer. I think Natalye has shared with us lots of great ideas and things to be thinking about, even in this time of social distancing. Reach out to your local charities by email, figure out how you can best support them. Of course, always keeping safety in mind. There's a link on a volunteer match in the handout, which provides an opportunity for you to do a little bit more research about how you can do this. And then finally, spread the word, use your communities, use your peer groups, use your friends and families to talk about some of the things that we've discussed in this and educate everyone about the importance of giving during this time. So I just, I read something last week about, Americans have responded to this pandemic with more generosity and solidarity than expected. So let's keep us united in helping our neighbors. The most important thing for all of you is not to wait. Now is the time to be giving to charity. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we've had $200 million go out just through Friday, just for COVID. And I think as some of the panelists mentioned, it's probably underreported. But there's one thing I just want to bring to your attention as donors of Fidelity Charitable. The biggest challenge we are facing right now is nonprofits not getting the checks. Either they're getting them and they're not able to cash them, or they're not getting them because they're being returned to us. So I would encourage all of you who work with nonprofits to give during this time to have them sign up for electric funds transfer on our website. We want to be able to get the money out quickly and not have it sitting in our warehouses or with the post office or even with some of your nonprofit organizations because they just haven't figured out how to get the money to the bank. So again, thank you to all of us for joining. Please give us your candid feedback on how we can continue to bring you great information during this time. And again, thank you again to our great panelists for your time this afternoon. Thanks, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you.